you for inviting me to this conference. I want to talk about the so-called German organ scandal and the amendments it led to in German legislation. I want to start with a very brief overview of a post-death organ allocation in Germany. Eurotransplant, which, as you may know, is a foundation in the Netherlands, is responsible for the allocation of particular organs of heart, lung, liver, kidney, and pancreas in Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Germany, Hungary, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Slovenia. The aim of this international cooperation is to ensure an optimal use of available donor organs. So if a patient is in need of one of those organs, one of the about 50 transplantation centers in Germany will put that patient on their waiting list and transmit his data to Eurotransplant. If an organ is then available, Eurotransplant receives the data concerning that donor organ from the German Organ Transplantation Foundation and compiles a so-called match list for that organ, at top of which is the patient most in need of it. In the case of liver transplant, the patient most in need is determined by the MELD score, which provides an estimate of the likelihood for patients to die within 3 months. The MELD score is calculated from various lab values. The patient with the highest MELD score is then offered the organ in question and must go immediately to his nearest transplantation center. Now, a few brief words also about the regulations concerning transplants in Germany. Post-death organ allocation is regulated by the German Transplantation Act. Section 12 of this act deals with the allocation criteria. It states that organs have to be allocated according to rules that correspond to the state of art of medical science, in particular according to the prospect of success and urgency for suitable patients. With the MELD score for liver transplant, obviously the criterion or the criteria of urgency is given priority. This Transplantation Act then commits the German Medical Association to establish guidelines for specific areas of transplantation. For instance, these guidelines define the criteria that must be met so that a patient can be added to the waiting list. It is, by the way, debated very controversially whether the German legislature was allowed, with regard to the constitution, to delegate this task to a not legitimized organ as the German Medical Association. And by the way, what is the German Medical Association? In Germany, the medical profession is widely self-administrated. Every physician is member of the Chamber of Physicians of his state. These chambers enact, for example, professional codes which regulate the ethical and professional obligations of physicians among themselves and vis-à-vis patients. The German Medical Association is the joint association of all state chambers of physicians, and it represents the interests of the medical profession in Germany, and sometimes, as in the case of transplantation medicine, also plays an active role in legislative procedures. So what happened then? That was even on an international level referred to as the German transplant scandal. 2012 was the year of the discovery of systematic manipulations by doctors in the field of transplantation medicine. 2 different kinds of manipulations came to light. Doctors had put patients on waiting lists, although they didn't meet the criteria established in the guidelines. And secondly, they had submitted falsified patients' data to Eurotransplant to move these patients up on Eurotransplant's match lists. The widespread disclosure of the scandal began on an initial suspicion in the field of liver transplants at the University Hospital in Göttingen in 2012. Physicians falsified medical data to place certain patients in higher places on the match list of Eurotransplant to allow them a faster organ allocation, while the priority that would otherwise have been of others was tainted. After the discovery of these manipulations, transplant centers across Germany were placed under criminal investigation. In 2013, these investigations brought to light 218 cases of obvious manipulations that have taken place in the years 2010 and 2011. In the following years, even more manipulations in transplantation centers in other cities were discovered. Due to these discoveries in 2012, post-death donations have dropped by between 20 and 40%. The numbers, however, seem to have risen slightly again since 2015. The question also is, what was it that drove the physicians in questions to that kind of fraud? It was structural incentives from hospital financing, it was competition between hospitals, and also the wish for reputation of individual doctors. The doctor or the physician responsible for the scandal in Göttingen went to trial in 2013. The case raised complex questions concerning the doctrine of criminal law in terms of causation. I will focus, however, on its main outcome. The doctor faced 11 charges of attempted manslaughter. Attempted, as there was no proof that any other patient on the match list had died because of his manipulations. He was alleged to have falsely claimed that the patients were on dialysis, therefore manipulating their MAL score in their favor. The patients thus achieved a higher ranking position in Eurotransplant's match list and so moved up on that list at the expense of others. Through these actions, the doctor may have caused the death of other patients on that list who may have had better MAL scores and therefore should have been given priority access. According to the allegations, the defendant must have known about the lethal consequences for the displaced patients. However, the trial before the Regional Court of Göttingen ended up with an acquittal, which was confirmed by the Federal Court of Justice in 2017. This was the situation the courts had to assess. Due to the manipulations, as I said, certain patients on the match list did not get the liver they would at least otherwise have been offered. However, attempted manslaughter not only requires that the physician's manipulation prevented these patients from receiving a liver, but also that he had the awareness that this liver would almost certainly have saved or at least prolonged their lives. But according to the courts, that was not the case. Due to a number of uncertain factors, the physician could not have had this awareness, as it cannot be proven that any patient would almost certainly have survived if he had received one of the livers in question. Among these uncertain factors are, for example, the following questions. Would that patient have been suitable for that liver? Would his medical condition have allowed the transplantation? Would he have survived the transplantation, considering the death rate of 5% to 10%? As a professional, the defendant knew about this uncertainty and therefore, said the courts, he had no reason to believe he would cause the death of a person that would otherwise have survived with near certainty. On the contrary, said the courts, he had reason to believe that his manipulations would not have any effect on the probability of other patients to be offered suitable livers. After all, there was an oversupply of donated livers at the time of the manipulations in question. Thus, every patient on the list could expect to receive even several offers. So in the end, what was considered highly unethical and immoral could not be pursued legally. This led to several amendments in the German Transplantation Act. And most importantly, a new criminal offense was enacted. Article 19, paragraph 2a of the German Transplantation Act, which basically states that it is forbidden to document falsified data or to submit falsified data to Eurotransplant. Even more measures were taken, even a bundle of measures the German Medical Association referred to as strengthen control, create transparency, and gain trust. First of all, there are no more bonus payments for doctors for transplanted organs. Eurotransplant also now requires more detailed patient information. For example, it is not enough to just tick a box that a patient received dialysis. They now require the records of dialysis treatment. Since 2012, the Examination and Supervision Commission of the German Medical Association is now also entitled to audit the transplantation centers on site, regardless of whether there's any suspicion of misconduct or not. The audit results are published annually. Each transplantation center has to install interdisciplinary transplant conferences, which are composed of at least 3 persons, 6 eyes principle, and decide which patients to include on the waiting list. And the German Medical Association has also established an independent trust center for transplantation medicine to report anomalies and violations of transplantation law. So how efficient are those measures? As I said, the report of the Examination and Supervision Commission is published annually. So let's take a look at the latest report from 2020-2021. The review, which is based on medical records of 541 organ recipients, shows no evidence of systematic policy violations or manipulations regarding patient data that is relevant to allocation. Still, a few questions remain. For instance, is the German Medical Association really legitimized to establish the criteria for organ allocation? And how can that body be controlled? Finally, how can patients be protected? Patients that are unlawfully barred from access to waiting lists or who doubt the legitimacy of a certain guideline of the German Medical Association. So not all questions have been answered with the changes that have been made following this scandal. Thank you very much.